what is the end goal of the sacrifices they're presenting at the foot of the mountain? Well,
Yeah.
the end goal is to
Or at
ascend
the
the
gate.
mountain,
Yeah, to ascend the mountain and
right?
get in.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
Be present with the Lord.
yes, to get in with the Lord, to have fellowship, intimate communion and fellowship with the Lord at the top of his holy hill, right, in his presence. And of course, that's symbolic of the ultimate ascent, which is the ascent into heaven itself, God's heavenly temple. So the Lord passes judgment on their sacrifices. Abel's he accepts, Cain's he rejects. And it says in verse 4 that he had regard for Abel and his offering. They were accepted, but he had no regard for Cain and his offering. So there's a connection between the worshiper and the worship offered. Both the worshiper and his worship are accepted in the case of Abel, rejected in the case of Cain. Now, it doesn't tell us why Cain's offering was rejected, and there's lots and lots of speculation over why it was. Bruce Waltke makes an argument in his article on Cain and Abel. He's got a whole article on this subject, that it was rejected because it was not the first fruits. And he brought some of his, the fruit of the ground, but it wasn't the first fruits. And, another theory or interpretation, rather, is that there was something defective in Cain himself that made
Sure.
his offering unacceptable to God.
We know God just doesn't like vegetables.
He certainly preferred the smell of the burning lamb over the fruits and vegetables. So there was definitely something defective with Cain. That becomes clear in the story.
Right.
So
There's no doubt
heart's
about
not
that.
right with God. He doesn't fear God.
Right.
He doesn't love God, and he doesn't trust in God. Cain is of the evil one, is what First John tells us, and that's certainly in contrast to Abel. So it's a false dichotomy to say it either has to be the offering that's defective or the offerer that's defective. It's really both in this case. But here's another puzzle. How did Cain know that his sacrifice was rejected? How did he know Abel's was accepted? How did he know his own was rejected by God? And again, there's all kinds of speculation over how. They could have received a word from God. They were receiving verbal, special revelation. Or there could have been some sort of sign indicating that one was accepted, the other rejected. And often that would have happened in Israel's worship.
Yeah.
There is an ancient tradition, it's only conjecture, but there is an ancient tradition that Abel's offering was consumed with fire that came from the top of Mount Eden. That fire came from heaven and consumed his offering.
Kind of like the account with Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Right. Yes. And numerous others, right? And Solomon's sacrifices were consumed that way, and several others in the Old Testament. But that's only conjecture. But Cain knew his was rejected and was angry. Verse 5 says he became very angry. So his enmity against God erupted at the altar of God. He hates God, and therefore he hates his brother, and his hatred of God erupts at the altar. It's not just against Abel that he's angry, it's against God, because God has rejected his sacrifice. So he's angry that God exercises his prerogative, his right to reject worship,
wow,
to deem it unlawful.